how did farming start for you?
My mother says that when I was a very, very little boy, I used to say I came into this world to be a farmer. Now, where did that come from? How did I know? Because apparently I said it, I think, on more than one occasion. I was brought up in an isolated house in the country, surrounded by fields, and I loved farming from the beginning. There was a farm not far away, but it was before the war, and there were more horses used on the farms then than tractors. And these lovely horses ploughed the fields round about and did most of the farm work. And the farm men who worked by hand, of course, then. These were familiar to me from my first days. And so I grew up with it and never questioned it. My father encouraged me. And I remember long before organic farming was sort of meant anything, Dad was in the Home Guard, and he had a doctor friend. And he came home one day and told us how this doctor had noticed in military field hospitals where wounded soldiers were coming in, how flies tended to sit on sick people, on where the wound was, of course. Festering wounds, gangrene and that sort of thing. Well, obvious, isn't it? Well, and that's the principle of organic farming. You see that sick people attract trouble, don't they? They attract the parasites and the disease. Whereas if you're a healthy person, the flies tend not to sit on you. Isn't that true?
And it's the same with plants.
And so it is, of course, with plants, and it all starts with the soil. A healthy soil produces healthy plants. Healthy plants produce healthy food produces healthy people. The cycle starts with the land. You see, and an unhealthy one produces a sick society. So.
You also said that farming then, and slightly afterwards, before really it became incredibly intense after the Second World War, was more than just how people earned their living. You said it was a way of life.
It was a way of life. I used to read, there was a magazine called The Farmer's Weekly, which I think actually is still there.
I was in it last week.
And you know, I used to read this as a boy. And I remember very well, it was the main argument really in the Farmer's Weekly between those that said farming's a way of life and those that the new sort of lobby, the young aggressive people that said it's to business. And of course the old guard didn't like it at all. It seemed almost immoral. You know, rather like sport was, nobody dreamt of professional sport. It was in fact, sport wasn't about winning, it was to play a good game, wasn't it? Good sportsmanship was what mattered. And I remember how really what quite a bitter argument it was as the first professional sportsman appeared and wanted money. And this emphasis on winning.
That's so
It is much the same in farming. The same thing happened, you see.
And so this is the 30s, 40s, this row, this argument, this tension that's happening.
40s? No, much how old? I was born in 37, so I was old enough to read and understand these things. I must have been, I suppose the 50s, 60s this was going on.
Yeah.
Which is when everything started to become much more intense. Very much so.
Yes, and people were wanting higher wages then, and machinery came in after the war. Yes.
And your first experience of farming was after you inherited the farm in Lincolnshire?
Oh, no, dear. That came in much, much later in life. No, I didn't. No, Dad was an artist. He wasn't a farmer. No, I started farming. I'll tell you how I did it. I was a schoolboy, and I just used to go to local farms and ask to help. And I just loved to be among cows, and they'd give me a shovel and shovel up the muck. I just loved doing that. Made me feel that I was doing what I loved. I was working among hay and manure and cows and grass, and I just loved it all, without question.
And your parents weren't farmers. They weren't involved in it, and but they understood it and knew.
Well, everybody was connected with the land. People weren't divorced from it then. My granddad was one of a large family, on a small farm in Lincolnshire, who'd come to Sheffield to go into business. So he was rooted in the land, but most people were. The streets were full of horses, and everybody was familiar with these things. My mother, as a little girl in Russia, my mum comes as a little girl, she spent her childhood in a Russian village and knew all about cows and milking and potatoes and things. Everybody was much closer naturally to the land.
So it was not an unusual thing, as in they didn't think that you were breaking away from the grain.
No,
It was completely natural.
Farming was associated, it was a good way of life, everybody knew that. It had a good status in society. Yes, if you were a farmer, you were respected. In fact, the owner of the farm where I used to go as a child, he was known to us as Farmer Jones, as like a title, Farmer Jones. That's how I would refer to him, Farmer Jones.
Do you think that's because there's something meaningful about providing food? It's the most elemental.
Well, meaningful about farming. I wouldn't even sort of bring it down to that utilitarian phrase. It was a way of life. And of course, anybody that had a farm would necessarily, wages were low enough then, and you would employ people. He had, I don't know, 3 men probably working for him, and so that gave him a sort of certain status in the village.
Yeah.
What was the meaning, do you think? The meaning that people...
Meaning attributed to farming.
That people knew it was a way of life that was respectful.
Well, it was natural.
Okay.
The obvious thing to do if you live in the country, which most people, well, of course, in those days, I suppose already the towns were growing. Probably most people did live in towns, but certainly the country was much more widely populated than it is now, not just as a residential place, but by working people. When you went for a walk then, the people you met were farm labourers. They weren't walkers in bright anoraks there for the leisure. There weren't any of those. You met working people.
Yeah.
It was hard, though. It was a physically hard...
Well, it was always said to be a hard life, but a good one. Oh, nothing wrong with a hard way of life.
No.
It was good. I always loved to work.
And the goodness came from what, do you think? What made it as satisfying?
Just common sense and nature. Natural.
It satisfied something that people felt instinctively that they needed.
Extraordinary how we ask questions about things like that, isn't it? No.
But the reality is that 84% of our population now live in urban areas, and people don't recognise birdsong and they don't understand insects. I'm interested to how we moved away from it, and we can explain that in capitalist business terms. We can explain why it happened, or rather, no, we can explain how it happened. But I'm interested in the why it happened and what has been lost with what lots of people would say is a game, and what the consequences of that are.
Why? Temptation, maybe. I don't know, why do things happen?
Mm.
Not sure that I can give you a answer to that. Temptation is as good a word as any.
Well, technology and machinery certainly forced the move to an extent. My grandfather would have 11 men on the farm. My uncle has him and his wife and a labourer during the summer. So that's one generation you've moved from a active living farm.
Oh, that would of course I'd be the war, dear. You see, 2 wars took so many men off the land, didn't they? And then the emphasis on growing more food put pressure on farming, and then chemicals came in which had phenomenal results, you see, and increased the crops. The first machinery, I suppose, sort of gradually eroded the old ways and almost became compulsive, I suppose. Wages went up. The loss of working men. The attractions of the towns. Many, many factors.
I mean, one of the losses has been an ecological knowledge,
Yes,
like
exactly.
on a very basic level.
I know, yes, absolutely.
Because if you can't see it,
Yes,
and
it's
you're
not
not-
real to us. No,
and you're not engaging with it, then you don't notice it.
no.
They call it shifting baseline theory, where you
Yes,
only see what's in front of you and think that that is normal,
yes.
and 2 generations below they would have been horrified by the absence of birdsong
I know.
or insects and so on.
Yes, I know. Yes, I know.
But when that ecological knowledge had to be part of pre-chemical farming, because it worked, as you've already said, together. Nature worked in a cycle, so you had to understand the cycle to know it. But I'm really interested in asking you what a good farm is.
What is good farming?
Because you said to me a moment ago that organic farming is not necessarily the same. Some organic farmers are not good farmers. I think regulation of organic farming had both a gain and a loss, and the loss may be what you've identified.
There's an old saying, the farmer's boot is the best manure.
What does that mean? As a manure?
The farmer's boot is the best manure. Perhaps it comes down to attention, Sarah.
The beginning of devotion.
You see, one of the things that machinery does is it puts a sort of blunting effect between you and the work you're doing. While we were having a cup of tea, I noticed there was a little cross on the table that somebody had done with a knife. Carved it, just nicely smoothed off 2 bits of wood, fitted them together with a knife. Now, when I was a boy, everybody carried a knife. It was absolutely obligatory. A shilling, a knife, and a piece of string. That was what my dad told me. Every boy should carry a knife. And now, good God, knives are forbidden, aren't they?
Yeah.
And you know, almost everything could be done with a knife. It was basic to every person's. What you could do, you take your knife out and do it with a knife. And, from cleaning out your nails to digging something out of a horse's hoof to cutting bits of string or to carving a little cross. You do it with your knife, don't you? Or peeling an apple or something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a good.
You don't go around sticking it into people. You do useful things with it. And of course, sharpen your pencil, sharpen your pen. That's what a pen knife is. When you had a pen, not a silly biro, but a goose's quill or something, or reed. You cut it with a pen, didn't you, with your pen knife? The fact that this little cross is made with a knife, that man did it, you see, like this. Well, how many people would, they go to a shop and buy one that's cut by machine, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
and fitted again, and just produced like that. Whereas this little cross has some meaning to it, doesn't it? It's a labour of love.
It's a labour of love.
And he enjoyed doing it, and it feels good. It's lovely, and it's absolutely unique. Now then, you ask what a farmer's boots are best manure. You see, you think of it like that. And when you're walking, when your feet are on the ground, instead of sitting up there in a tractor, you're in touch with the earth, aren't you? And you see things. And when you see things, there's an interaction at that level, at that hands-on level. And this is what produces a quality like this cross compared to a mass-produced cross in a shop that you buy for. And there's no money involved in this either, which is important. You bypass the whole economy. In fact, economics didn't exist, I don't think, until some clever people started inventing it.
I don't know much about the history of economics. It's not my field. I just know it rules us.
Economics, sociology and all these things are newfangled inventions that people got on very well without years ago.
So the nature of a good farmer is applicable in every area of life. It's as applicable to whether you're making a woodwork cross.
Attention is a very good word. Hands-on attention. Keep your feet on the ground, my granddad would say to me. And I think this is still one of the best meditations, or the best, one of the fundamental principles to anybody that's searching for a better life. Keep your feet on the ground. And there you're connected with stability, with the rock of Mother Earth. You won't go far wrong. But people you're not aware of it. You've got to feel your feet on the ground, actually put them on the ground. Listen and look. And you're there then. You'll see what's in front of your nose, which most people don't. And there's no books involved, no other people's interpretation. You see it for yourself. Common sense.
That is a philosophy that can reach far further than...
Of course. Yes, of course. Well, of course, organic is... People talk of organic farming, but it's a universal principle of living naturally, which we're all instinctively longing for. Closer integration with the meaning of what's it all about, what are we here for.
Yeah, and the sense of connection and purpose. So does that tie into why organic farming as a sort of labelled product, as a regulated way, is not something that you respond to?
Well, it's too small and narrow.
Needs to be life-reaching.
Well, this is the trouble with labelling things, is that you limit it, you see. And then you categorise it this and that. It always saddens me when I hear discussions on organic farming, and almost invariably you get criticism coming in. You know, people start talking about, the bad. You used a phrase earlier yourself. What did you say? Something about?
Well, it was Jake's phrase, the Taliban farmer.
Yes, you see, that's criticism. Think how that immediately puts you into a state of duality, into opposition. You know, criticism, one of the fundamental commandments of Jesus is, do not judge. Because the moment you judge, you're putting yourself in the wrong position. You're dividing the world, and if you divide, you're fracturing the essence of organic thinking. It's the good and the bad, the black and the white, and then you're on the slippery slope. You're missing the point. Organic in spirit, my dear, as well as in the flesh. What's the point of being organic in the flesh if you're not in the spirit, if you're divided in your mind? You're poisoning the world. The real poison in this world isn't plastic or chemicals, it's what's in here. Poisonous thinking, that does more damage than all the chemicals in the world.
So how do you reach an organic mind? How do you reach an organic mind?
Well, a good first step is not to judge. Feet on the ground. Listen and look, and you'll then be present, won't you? And if you're present, you're not thinking, are you? Your mind is quiet. And if you really look, there's no judgment. You'll see what's in front of your nose and you'll find it beautiful, whatever it is.
Some of the farms I've been to I do not find beautiful.
Well, then the trouble's in here.
But it's difficult when you see death caused by farming. So when you see insects or hares running under sprayer booms and...
Well, it's a long evolution. That's why we're given a long life. Because life is a school. But we start off from where we are. I did myself. I was a very critical young man. But gradually I've learned. I'll tell you if I may. Do you mind if I wander on like this?
I'd love that.
Because, again, I've told this story so many times you'll be bored with it, but maybe you haven't heard it. But when I had my first farm down the road here, and it was grass. And I loved this grass with all my heart and soul. I was so proud of it. And I wore hobnailed boots in those days, big heavy boots. And one day, I think it must have been in spring where the grass was beginning to grow with that unbelievably beautiful, tender magic of young grass. And I walked across my field and I realized I couldn't walk across it without hurting the grass. My God, what a lesson that was. I, the great lover of the land, couldn't walk across the land without hurting it. What's all that about? How could I be a farmer without hurting the land? How could I conserve the land I loved so much without hurting it? Now, my friends, all organic farmers, large and small, take that one on board. And so I began to sort of question, well, what am I? What is man? And of course, the fairies. Why can fairies dance across the fields without hurting the grass? And sit on flowers without hurting them? Why can't I be a fairy? And of course, this is what spiritual life is all about. This is how integral it is, you see, what our work is in this world, be it farming or anything else. And our gradual realization of the significance of spirit. And also, the subject just expands and expands, but remember I had kept sheep in those days, always loved sheep, and realizing that these lambs of mine, Lamb of God, that taketh away the sins of the world. What does that mean? Is Christ called the Lamb of God? Why should these lovely lambs be sent to the butcher to feed me? To feed man? What for? What is man? What are we doing? Destroying the world, crushing the lovely grass for me? For me? Or maybe I'm not such an asset as I thought. Who is the first pollution in this world, if not me? What's the use in blaming poor plastic? It's me. I'm the first pollution in this world, the first parasite in this world. So, how can I make a better job of myself? And this, of course, is... Well, I'm sorry, I introduced Christ, didn't I? And you come to see how that not only the lambs, but the grass are like Christ, you see, sacrificed for this number one parasite, me. The number one problem with the world is me, because I'm not a fairy, I'm not spiritual. I've fallen in consciousness from my true estate, which is spirit, into this corrupt body of what's called sin, a bit of an old-fashioned word to introduce at this stage, but very meaningful, which of course dies, mortality, because we die because we're not where we belong, which is in spirit. In spirit nobody dies, nobody kills and is eaten, because all this is to do with the flesh. The world, the flesh, and the devil, which is the fallen consciousness from man's truest state, which I referred to as a young boy as the fairies, where you see there's no death, and this world is a world of death. No matter how much you save the world, it'll die tomorrow. You can cure all the diseases in the world, but you still die tomorrow of something else. You can't stop the world dying, because the whole world is infected with this disease of mortality, which comes from our leaving our true natural home of spirit and falling into this world. We bring the whole creation with us. As God says, cursed is the world, the land for thy sake. It starts with me. So you see, organic farming is really just the beginning. It's the first steps in the process of the great work of restoring it on a universal scale. So God bless our efforts. I started as a young farmer trying to make my 3 acres, more natural. But of course that expands. That's just the first step. It grows and grows. The great work is again, to use a biblical phrase, is redemption. Coming back to God. And then you see there's no more problem, is there?
I mean, what I do in a very simplistic way know is that death is part of farming, and means that you confront death in a way that death has become sanitized in modern life. We don't really look at death. We don't look at death in our food. We don't look at death in our family. We don't look at natural death. There's lots of unnatural death, stabbings, and suicide, and the problems of unnatural death. But natural death is removed from all of us. And I think farming is an extraordinarily visceral reminder of natural death. But yeah, miscarriage is a completely natural part, and in animals happens frequently enough. I think that's one of the reasons that farming is more than farming. Farming is a lesson in life.